In this video, we'll learn how to identify the center and radius of a circle based off of its equation. In our last video, we learned that for a circle with center point h, k and radius r, its equation in standard form is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Let's take a look at some examples of equations of circles. In example A, we have the equation x minus 2 squared plus y plus 5 squared equals 49. Our goal here is to identify its center and radius. Luckily for us, the equation of this circle is given in standard form. Now, if we want to identify the center, we see that the x-coordinate of the center is the number that's being subtracted from the x, and the y-coordinate of the center is the number that's being subtracted from the y. In our example here, we see that 2 is being subtracted from the x, so we can tell that the x-coordinate for the center is 2. However, when we look at the term with the y, we have y plus 5, and it's not obvious that there's a number being subtracted from the y. Now what we can do is rewrite this as y minus negative 5 squared, and now we see that a negative 5 is being subtracted from the y. And so the y-coordinate for the center is negative 5. So in this first example, the center is 2, negative 5. This is consistent with what we had mentioned in the previous video. If you want to find the center for your circle, all you have to do is flip the signs of the numbers that are with your x and y. We had an x with a negative 2, and so the x-coordinate for the center is positive 2. We have a positive 5 with the y, and so the y-coordinate for the center is negative 5. In order to find the radius of the circle, we want to look at the right-hand side of our equation. The right-hand side here is the radius squared. So for our problem here, if we want to determine the radius, first of all, we know that the right-hand side of the equation is the radius squared. So we can set r squared equal to 49. And so if we want to find the radius, all we have to do is take the square root of both sides. We see that there are two options for r. Either r is positive 7 or r is equal to negative 7. But keep in mind that r is the radius of the circle. The radius is the distance between a point on the circle and the center. Since distances are typically positive quantities, we say that our radius is positive 7. So for this example, our center is 2, negative 5, and the radius is 7. Let's now look at example B. Here we have the equation x plus 3 squared plus y squared equals 10. Once again, the equation of this circle is given in standard form, so it'll be easy to find the center and radius. As we've mentioned in the previous example, if you want to find the center of the circle, you just take the numbers that are with your x and y and you flip the sign. Here we have a positive 3 with our x, so if we flip the sign, we see that the x-coordinate for our center is negative 3. For our y though, there's no number that's with the y. So when that's the case, we can always think about this as y minus 0 squared. So the number that's with the y is 0, which means that the y-coordinate for our center is 0. So for this circle, we have the center negative 3, 0. As for the radius of this circle, remember the right-hand side is the radius squared. So we have r squared equals to 10. And so if you want to find r, we just take the square root of both sides. And taking the positive square root option, we get r equals positive square root of 10. So one thing to point out here is that your radius doesn't necessarily have to be a whole number. In this case, our radius is square root of 10, which is an irrational number. In example C, our equation is 2 times x minus 3 squared plus 2 times y plus 4 squared equals 50. This time, our equation is not quite in standard form. When we compare this with the standard form for the equation of a circle, we see that the only thing that's different is that we have these factors of 2. So in order to put our equation in standard form, all we have to do is divide both sides of this equation by 2. So dividing the left-hand side by 2, we're left with x minus 3 squared plus y plus 4 squared. And then on the right-hand side, 50 divided by 2 gives us 25. Now that it's in standard form, we can easily identify the center. All we have to do is look at the numbers that are with the x and y and flip the signs. We see that there is a negative 3 with the x, so the x coordinate for the center is positive 3. And we see a positive 4 with the y, so flipping the sign, the y coordinate for the center is negative 4. So in this problem, the center is 3, negative 4. To determine the radius of the circle, we just have to remember that the radius squared is the right-hand side of our equation. So we have r squared equals 25. And so if we want to find the radius, take the square root of both sides and take the positive square root. We have r equals positive 5. So the radius for our circle is positive 5. Let's look at a couple more examples of equations of circles that are not given in standard form. In example D here, we're given the equation x squared plus y squared plus 4x minus 2y plus 1 equals 0. This looks nothing like the standard form for a circle. So if we want to determine the center and radius, what we need to do is first rewrite this so that it is in standard form. Now to do this, we'll follow a few steps. So our first step is to group all of the x terms together, group all of the y terms together, and then we want to move the term that doesn't have any factors of x or y to the right-hand side. So here in this problem, we want to subtract 1 from both sides to move that 1 to the right-hand side of the equation. So grouping the x's together, we have x squared plus 4x. Grouping the y's together, we have y squared minus 2y. And then on the other side of the equation, we have negative 1. Our next step is to complete the square. So let's rewrite our equation. We have x squared plus 4x. Now, before I write my y terms, I'm going to leave myself a little bit of space. Then I'm going to add y squared minus 2y. Again, we'll leave ourselves a little bit of space, and then we have equals negative 1 on the right-hand side. Now, when we complete the square, we're looking to add a number to these x's so that we can factor it as a square. Remember that the number that we need to add at the end here is half of the middle number squared. So take 4, divide that by 2, and then square the result. 4 divided by 2 gives us 2, and if we square it, we end up with 4 again. So we need to add 4 to complete the square. Now we can't just add 4 to one side of the equation. What we do to one side of the equation, we also need to do to the other side. So add 4 to the right-hand side as well. Now for the y's, we also want to complete the square. So we need to add a number at the end here. Just like before, to figure out the number to add at the end, we need to take that middle number, the negative 2 here, divide that by 2, and then square the result. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared gives us positive 1. And again, we can't just add 1 to one side of the equation. What we do to one side, we also have to do to the other side. So we need to add 1 to the right-hand side as well. Now, there's just one last step to write our equation in standard form. What we need to do is factor and combine the numbers on the right-hand side. We'll be factoring these x terms as a square. We'll be factoring these y terms as a square. And then we'll combine the numbers on the right-hand side. So looking at the x's here, we have x squared plus 4x plus 4. If we factor that, we're going to end up with x plus 2 squared. Remember that when we go through the completing the square process, when we factor it, the number that's with your variable is always half of the middle number. Now, factoring y squared minus 2y plus 1, we end up with y minus 1 squared. Again, we have a negative 1 with the y because that's half of this middle number. Lastly, combining the numbers on the right-hand side, negative 1 plus 4 plus 1 gives us positive 4. So now our equation is in standard form. And since it's in standard form, we can easily identify what the center and radius are for this circle. The center, we look at the numbers that are with the x's and y's, and we flip the sign. So we have an x plus 2, which means that the x-coordinate for the center is -2. We have a y minus 1, so the y-coordinate for the center is +1. So for the circle, our center is -2, 1. Now for the radius, we know that the right-hand side of this equation is the radius squared. So we have r squared equals 4. To find the radius, we take the square root of both sides. This gives us r equals 2. So for our circle here, our radius is 2. Let's look at one last example. This time, our equation is x squared plus y squared minus 10x plus 16y plus 50 equals 0. Again, this equation for the circle is not given in standard form, so if we want to identify the center and radius, we need to first write it in standard form. We'll follow the same steps as our previous example. So first, we'll group the x terms together, we'll group the y terms together, and then we'll move the 50 to the right-hand side of this equation. So to move this 50, we have to subtract 50 from both sides. So our equation is going to look like x squared minus 10x plus y squared plus 16y equals -50. Our second step is to complete the square. So let's copy our equation. We have x squared minus 10x. Leave yourself a little bit of space. Then plus y squared plus 16y. Leave yourself some more space. And then on the right-hand side of this equation, we have -50. So we'll try to complete the square for these x terms by adding some number at the end there. And we'll complete the square for the y terms by adding some number at the end. So let's start with the x terms. To complete the square, we take this middle number, the -10 here, we divide that by 2, and we square the result. So -10 divided by 2 is -5. -5 squared gives us 25. So we need to add 25 to complete the square. Now whatever we add to one side of the equation, we also need to add to the other side. So add 25 to the right-hand side as well. Now for the y's, we have y squared plus 16y. What we need to do is take this middle term, the 16y, divide that by 2, and square the result. 16 divided by 2 gives us 8. 8 squared gives us 64. So to complete the square for the y terms, we add 64. And whatever we add to one side of the equation, we also need to add to the other side. So add 64 to the right-hand side as well. Our last step is to factor and combine the numbers on the right-hand side. So take the x terms, x squared minus 10x plus 25, we'll factor that. Take the y terms, y squared plus 16y plus 64, we'll factor that, and then we'll combine those numbers on the right-hand side. Factoring the x terms, we're going to get x minus 5 squared. Factoring the y's, we get y plus 8 squared. On the right-hand side of this equation, we have -50 plus 25 plus 64. This gives us 39. So the equation for our circle is now in standard form, and we can identify the center and radius. The center of this circle, just look at the numbers that are with your x and y and flip the sign. So we have a -5 with the x, which means the x-coordinate is +5. We have a +8 with the y's. Flipping the sign, this gives me -8 as the y-coordinate. So the center for our circle is 5, -8. For the radius, we know that the right-hand side of our equation is the radius squared. So we have r squared equals 39. If we want to find the radius, take the square root of both sides. We get the radius is equal to square root of 39. So in this video, we learned how to take an equation of a circle and write it in standard form. And once the equation is in standard form, we are able to identify the center and radius of the circle.